I had been counting down the days like a teenager waiting for a concert. After weeks of cooking dinners that went cold and folding endless piles of laundry, I was desperate for a night that belonged just to me. Tonight was girls' night, and for once, I could breathe without the weight of responsibility pressing on my chest. I slipped into my favorite navy dress, the one that still hugged me in all the right places, and dabbed on a bold red lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I almost startled myself. I saw the woman I used to be. Not just a wife, not just a mother, but me. Walking into the restaurant felt like stepping into another world. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over white linen tables, and the air smelled of roasted garlic, butter, and expensive wine. I felt a spark of excitement, like maybe tonight could remind me what it felt like to laugh without watching the clock. My heels clicked confidently against the floor as I scanned the room. In the corner, I spotted the table my friends had reserved. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flutter of lightness inside me. But then, something, or rather, someone, caught my eye. Across the room, in the soft flicker of candlelight, sat James. My James. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, maybe even a sweet surprise. But then I saw her. A woman with hair like spun gold, young enough to be our daughter's friend, leaning in close as his hand brushed hers. My smile collapsed. My breath caught. And in that moment, the night I had been looking forward to suddenly became something else entirely. I froze in the middle of the dining room, clutching my little black purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. My friends waved from across the restaurant, their laughter carrying over the music, but I couldn't move toward them. My eyes stayed locked on James, watching the way his whole body leaned into hers, as if I'd suddenly ceased to exist. My chest tightened, a painful knot forming beneath my ribs, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. If I faltered now, everyone would see. And I wasn't about to give either of them that satisfaction. I slipped into my seat with the girls, masking the storm brewing inside me with a smile I didn't feel. They were chatting about work, grandkids, and weekend plans, their voices a comforting hum, but my ears kept straying back to the familiar baritone across the room. Every laugh from that woman felt like a knife, every glance between them a betrayal I couldn't unsee. I wanted to scream, to march over and demand answers, but something inside me whispered, "Not here. Not now." So I stirred my wine, pretending to listen, while my eyes betrayed me, darting toward them again and again. The candle between them flickered like it was mocking me, casting shadows on James's face I didn't even recognize anymore. My friends asked me if I was okay, and I brushed it off, saying I was just a little tired. But the truth was, my entire world had shifted in an instant. And as I sat there, smiling through clenched teeth, I began to realize this night was about to take me down a path I never saw coming. The waiter placed a glass of wine in front of me, his polite smile fading as he caught the stiffness in mine. I mumbled a thank you, praying he wouldn't glance over his shoulder and notice James sitting just a few tables away. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might echo through the room. I tried to focus on the laughter around me, on the clinking of silverware and the soft jazz drifting from the speakers. But my gaze kept drifting back, like a moth to a flame I wanted nothing to do with. James leaned in again, his lips forming words I couldn't hear, and that young woman giggled like she was in on some intimate secret. I wanted to believe I was mistaken, that it wasn't him, that I was imagining it. But I knew his profile, the way his hand moved when he gestured, the tilt of his head when he listened. There was no mistake. A strange calmness settled over me, almost eerie, as if my body refused to let my heart completely shatter. I forced myself to sit straighter, swirling the wine as though I were perfectly content, but every second felt like an eternity. My friends were still chatting, unaware of the bomb that had just detonated inside me. I smiled at them, nodded, even laughed at a joke I didn't hear, while the betrayal played out in the corner of my eye. My stomach twisted, but I told myself I needed to think. I couldn't let him see me like this. Not yet. Because something deep inside whispered that this was only the beginning. I sat frozen in my chair, staring past the rim of my wine glass. My friends' voices blurred into a distant hum, as though someone had turned the world's volume down. James's hand slid across the table, brushing hers, lingering just a little too long. I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming that I couldn't swallow down. My heart wanted to leap out of my chest, to scream and demand answers, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't move. I was locked in place, a statue painted in disbelief. The woman across from him laughed again, the sound bright and youthful, slicing through me like glass. Her eyes sparkled in the candlelight as she leaned closer, her lips so close to his I thought they might touch. And James, my husband, looked at her the way he hadn't looked at me in years. That look I once believed belonged only to me. Suddenly, the flowers between them seemed too extravagant, the champagne too intimate. It was a scene straight from a romance movie, except I wasn't the leading lady. My palms were slick with sweat, and I had to remind myself to breathe. A part of me wanted to storm across the room, knock over their perfect little table, and demand the truth right there in front of everyone. But another part, a quieter, stronger part, told me to wait. To watch. To let him believe he was safe in his little fantasy. So I kept my mask on, sipping my wine, while my mind began turning over a darker, more deliberate possibility. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I kept my expression soft, almost serene. It was a performance, and I had to play my role well. My friends didn't suspect a thing, too wrapped up in their stories about work stress and grown kids who still called home for advice. Meanwhile, my eyes darted to James again. He was leaning back now, that familiar half-smile tugging at his lips, the one he used to reserve for me when we were younger. I wanted to vomit. Every detail cut deeper. The way his hand absent-mindedly traced circles on the rim of his champagne glass. The way her eyes never left his face. The way their knees almost touched beneath the table. My mind raced through every Friday night excuse he had given me. Late meetings, just one more report, the traffic. All of it, every word, suddenly seemed like a rehearsed line in a play I hadn't known I was in. And here he was, rehearsing new lines with her. I pressed my nails into my palm, grounding myself in the sharp sting of reality. Anger simmered, but I swallowed it, refusing to create a spectacle in front of my friends. No, not yet. I wasn't going to be the weeping, humiliated wife tonight. I would not let them see me broken. I sat there, watching, listening, memorizing every stolen glance and touch. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos inside me, a seed of resolve quietly took root, waiting for its moment to grow. I couldn't stop watching, even though every second felt like torture. My fork lay untouched, the pasta cooling on my plate, but my appetite had vanished the moment I saw his hand brush hers. My friends were too busy laughing to notice that my eyes weren't on them anymore. My heart wasn't in that corner of the restaurant. It was being crushed right there under James's palm as he leaned closer to her. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to know what she had that I didn't. But instead of answers, I got more questions. Why was she smiling like she knew something I didn't? Why was he looking at her like she was the only woman in the world? And why did it feel like I was watching a stranger, not the man I had shared my life with for over 20 years? The champagne bottle glistened between them, the bubbles dancing up the glass, mocking me with their sparkle. My pulse throbbed in my ears, drowning out everything else. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another second of this twisted performance, he reached across the table and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. That was our gesture. Something intimate, something he used to do when we were young and in love. My chest ached, but my face remained calm, almost eerily so. I knew I had a choice: cause a scene or stay silent. And in that silence, I realized something powerful. A plan was already beginning to form. I pushed my chair back quietly, the scrape of wood against marble masked by the restaurant's chatter. My friends barely noticed as I excused myself, muttering something about needing some air. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, stiff and heavy, but they carried me toward the exit anyway. Just before slipping out, I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing in my trembling hands. I aimed the camera across the room, my heart hammering, and snapped a photo. The click was silent, but in my ears it thundered. I stood there for a moment, hidden behind a column, snapping one photo after another. James leaned in closer, his hand grazing her cheek this time, her lips curling into a smile I once thought was mine alone. My chest ached, but my fingers stayed steady on the screen. Every image felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, but strangely, I wasn't crying. Not a single tear. My face was calm, my body controlled, even as the betrayal screamed in my veins. When I finally walked out into the night, the cool air hit me like a slap. I should have felt shattered, but instead I felt sharp, awake in a way I hadn't in years. James thought he was clever, thought he had fooled me with his late nights at work, but now I held something he didn't know about: evidence, proof, power. And as I tucked my phone into my purse, one thought pulsed louder than my broken heart. What would I do with it? That night, James came home close to midnight, just like he always did on Fridays. I was sitting up in bed with a glass of water on my nightstand, pretending to read. He walked in smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, the scent clinging to him like a guilty whisper. "Long meeting," he muttered, dropping his jacket carelessly over a chair. I glanced at the phone in my hand, its screen dark now, hiding the photos that could shatter his lies. My lips curled into a smile, small, controlled, deliberate. I nodded and closed my book, as if his excuse was enough to satisfy me. My heart was still beating hard, but I forced my voice to sound casual. "Long day, huh?" I said, pulling the blanket up to my chest. He seemed relieved, as if my acceptance freed him from suspicion. If only he knew. I lay there in the dark after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, every quiet snore from him a reminder of the show he had put on just hours earlier. By morning, the decision had already crystallized inside me. I wasn't going to scream or beg, and I certainly wasn't going to fight for scraps of his attention. No, I had something far stronger on my side, the no infidelity clause I had insisted on before we ever said, "I do." I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number that would change everything. My lawyer picked up on the second ring, and that was when I whispered the first words of my plan. I spoke softly, almost as if I were sharing a secret, not dismantling a marriage. My lawyer listened in silence, only interrupting to ask for dates, times, proof. With every photo I sent, I felt a little more of my pain shift into something sharper, something like purpose. He reminded me of the clause James had agreed to without hesitation all those years ago, back when he was so eager to prove his loyalty. That very clause, the one I'd almost felt guilty about, was now my salvation. The rest of the day, I carried myself like nothing had changed. I cooked breakfast, folded laundry, even kissed James on the cheek as he left for work. He didn't notice how stiff I was, how my smile never reached my eyes anymore. That was fine by me. The more he thought I was blind, the deeper he'd dig his own grave. I replayed the images in my mind, each frame of his betrayal hardening my resolve. The time for tears was over. By Sunday, the plan was set. I had the photos printed, sealed in an envelope that now felt heavier than bricks. I tucked it into my purse, running my fingers over the crisp edges, feeling the power surge through me like a secret weapon. My friends thought I was brave for keeping quiet on Friday night. Little did they know, I was saving the moment for something far more devastating. And when Sunday dinner came, I would finally make him choke on his lies. Sunday arrived, and with it came a strange calm I couldn't explain. I set the dining table with the good china, polished the silver until it gleamed, and placed fresh flowers in the center vase. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air, the kind of meal I used to make when I wanted to spoil James. My hands moved automatically, as if muscle memory was guiding me, while my mind focused on the envelope resting in my purse by the door. When the family trickled in, the house filled with chatter, laughter, and clinking wine glasses. James was in his element, telling stories from work, puffing up his chest like he was the man of the hour. He laughed a little too loud, bragged a little too much, soaking in the admiration like sunlight. I watched him play the role of devoted husband and accomplished professional, and it made my stomach twist. He had no idea that tonight was going to end very differently. I sat at the head of the table, my posture steady, my heart beating a rhythm only I could hear. The envelope was still by my side, brushing against my leg, reminding me of what I was about to do. Every word he spoke, every smug grin, only sharpened my resolve. I looked around at the family members hanging on his every word, their pride swelling with each boast. And as the laughter rang out, I knew the time to strike was coming faster than he could imagine. I waited, letting him enjoy his own performance a little longer. He went on and on about how late nights at the office were paying off, how promotions don't just fall into your lap, you have to work for them. The irony almost made me laugh. If only they knew what kind of work he was really doing when he stayed out until midnight. I let my fingers tap against my wine glass, every beat keeping time with the fire in my chest. Then, at the perfect moment, I leaned forward and reached into my purse. The room was warm, but I swear the air turned icy when I slid that envelope across the table. "Funny," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Because when I saw you Friday night, you weren't with your colleagues." His hand froze midair, the smile wiped clean off his face. The silence that followed was deafening, every eye in the room snapping to him. He blinked at me, confused at first, then nervous. "What are you talking about, Sophia?" His voice cracked, and I could see the panic flicker in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, I nodded toward the envelope. "Go ahead, open it," I said, keeping my gaze locked on his. My heart was steady now, my fear replaced by something sharper, something almost electric. Because once he looked inside, there would be no turning back. James's fingers trembled as he tugged the photos from the envelope. One by one, they slid out, glossy under the chandelier's light, each image capturing him with her. His face drained of color, and for a moment, I thought he might faint right there in front of his parents. The woman sitting next to him, my mother-in-law, leaned in and gasped. I could feel every eye in the room shift back and forth between us like a tennis match. He opened his mouth, scrambling for words, but I didn't give him the chance. "You said you were working late," I said, my voice calm, sharp enough to cut glass. He started to stammer, something about a client, about misunderstandings, about me getting it all wrong. But his hands betrayed him. They shook, clutching the pictures as though they burned. I didn't need his explanations. I had heard enough excuses to last me a lifetime. I pushed my chair back, my heart steady, my voice firm. "Save your lies, James. You'll need your energy for packing your things." His fork clattered to the plate, and the room filled with shocked silence, my family watching in disbelief. For the first time in years, I felt taller, stronger, untouchable. He had written his own downfall. I was just turning the page. And as his eyes filled with dread, I knew this was only the beginning of the real ending. The papers were ready days before Sunday, and I handed them to him with a steady hand. I didn't need to shout or throw a fit. His own shame did the work for me. My lawyer had confirmed it. That little clause James had brushed off as romantic nonsense now sealed his fate. The house, the savings, even the vacation home he flaunted to impress his mistress, all of it was mine. The silence around the dinner table was deafening, but I felt an odd relief in it. James tried to speak, his lips parting with desperate apologies, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I whispered, my voice sharper than any scream could be. His shoulders sagged as if I had drained the air right out of him. My friend sat frozen, my in-laws' eyes narrowed with quiet fury. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking. I wasn't the one being diminished. I was the woman in control. Days later, the locks were changed, his belongings gone from the closet like they had never existed. Word traveled fast, faster than I expected. The whispers followed him to work, to his so-called promotions, and soon the woman with the golden hair was nowhere to be found. She had wanted the shine, not the man. And as for me, I had something better than revenge. I had freedom. But that wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. I poured myself a glass of wine in the quiet of my kitchen and looked around. Everything felt different now. The same walls, the same furniture. But without his presence, it was as though the house could finally breathe again. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, wondering what mood James would bring home at midnight. For the first time in years, peace lingered in the silence. I could almost taste it, sweeter than any dessert on that restaurant table. But don't mistake my calm for weakness. I wasn't done. He thought losing me was the only price he'd pay, but he had underestimated just how deeply his betrayal had cut. I wanted him to feel the sting of consequences, not just the ache of absence. So while he packed his things into boxes, I was making calls, meeting with advisors, and putting every part of our agreement into motion. Every detail was another thread in the web I was quietly spinning. The day the settlement was finalized, I watched him walk away from the courthouse with nothing but a suitcase and his regrets. No house, no savings, not even the car he drove her around in. He glanced back at me once, his eyes empty, and I felt nothing. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. My friends kept asking me what I'd do next, now that I was free. And as I looked at that signed decree in my hands, I realized I had one more move to make. A few months later, I found myself back at that same restaurant, the one where my world had cracked open. Only this time, I wasn't walking in with my heart fluttering for James. I was with my girlfriends, the ones who had unknowingly shielded me that night with their laughter and chatter. I wore that same navy dress, but now it wasn't about clinging to the past. It was about owning who I was, scars and all, and walking in with my head held high. We were seated at a table by the window, the very spot where I had once watched James lean in toward her. The irony wasn't lost on me. I ordered champagne, not to toast him, but to celebrate myself. My friends raised their glasses, their smiles genuine, their love unconditional. The music played, softer this time, almost as if the universe had dialed it down just for me. I laughed, a real laugh, one that came from a place of freedom, not fear. Then, as if fate wanted to write the final chapter for me, I saw him. James, alone, hair a little grayer, his suit wrinkled, no golden-haired girl in sight. He spotted me too, and for a moment our eyes met. He looked smaller, diminished, like a man haunted by everything he'd thrown away. I didn't need to say a word. I just smiled, lifted my glass, and turned back to my friends. That table for two had once broken my heart, but now it was his prison forever.